Hi, it's Alex here from Blacksheep IT Consulting. Today I want to talk a little bit about the Siebel app that is available on Blacksheep CRM GitHub. So what you're looking at is the old version, and I've been working with a new JavaScript framework called Shoelace, and I modernized or refactored the app, and I would just like to let you know how I did that and what are my experiences and what is my impression of Shoelace. So let's go back to the Siebel app in case you have never heard about this before. This is what I call a strictly educational project, so use it at your own peril. And it's a no-frills web app that uses JavaScript and jQuery, that's the old version, to connect to Siebel CRM inbound REST API. So there's a quick installation guide. So basically you download the three files here, index.html, siebelapp CSS, and siebelapp.js, and put them in a folder. Best place for first experimentation is the folder web apps /root in your external AI container. Why? Because then you can simply open it and basically use Tomcat, the external Tomcat, to host it. So I've been doing that with the old version just to give you a comparison. So this is the old version. It starts with a login page, and once you click login, prompts you for a valid Siebel user. So I'm using as admin here, and once you provide a valid Siebel user, you can, well, switch between two tabs, accounts and contacts. And once you select accounts, there's literally a inbound REST API call to Siebel CRM and fetches account data. And there's also a little bit of search. So let's search for sheep. And there's Blacksheep IT Consulting, and you can click any of the tiles of the list, and you can have an edit button. You can edit a few fields. And one of the showcases here is that we pull the list of values as well using the AI LOV service from the REST API. So this is a fully read and write enabled web application. It's based on JavaScript and jQuery and the inbound Siebel REST API. So that is the functionality here. So I can change the status, for example, and save it, and it saves that and gives you a bit of feedback so that I saved that successfully. So you notice that this app is really primitive. Let's say it has all the features that we'd expect, but let's say from a user interface standpoint, it's pretty basic. So there's some basic CSS going on, and I was focusing at that time on demonstrating the Siebel inbound REST API, which, as you can see in the network tab, is called quite a lot. And you can see the payload here. You can see the response coming back, typical Siebel JSON. And if you look down in the source code, you see that response, of course, being translated into HTML. So that's the old application. You no longer find it on GitHub when you see that video, because I've been refactoring it to this. This is the new version. And you can see there's, well, it's now dark mode, so that can be changed with a style sheet. And there's a login. So I'm logging in with the same user. And this one also has leads, aka opportunities. So what happens when you click accounts? Okay, so that data is definitely presented in a, well, you could argue with that, but in a prettier way than before. Of course, it's fully scrollable. I'm showing it on a mobile phone emulator. Well, of course, it works on any screen size, really. So, of course, a very large screen doesn't make much sense. It's definitely optimized for smaller screens like a phone. That's why I keep switching back to the phone. So you can still click a tile or a card, and you can press edit, and there you have the drop down, set the status, set other fields that are eligible for editing, and save that as feedback. Changes have been saved. Let's run the query again. Okay, so now the status is back to active. So yeah, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but this user interface is driven by something called shoelace. So if you're new to shoelace, let me quickly go there. The homepage is shoelace.style, and that's a lot of documentation. Of course, you have to read first, but let's see how this works. So basically, you have a lot of standard web components that Shoelace more or less generates in layman's terms, and modern browsers support this, and it can be used across frameworks. You can use it with React or Vue.js. It's fully customizable in terms of CSS, and one of the benefits is that you can also use it with literally any framework of choice, so plain JavaScript or even jQuery, which of course is a boomer framework of sorts, but since it's in Siebel, I use it a lot. So here, for example, let's check out that button, and it generates a simple enough button with a few predefined styles. Let's look at the source. So this is just a tag language where you specify an SL, a shoelace button, with a text of button. And of course you have to import the shoelace JavaScript, and that imports a lot of other stuff, chunks. And then, yeah, the magic happens. A button is generated in the browser. And that, of course, is also happening for cards, which I used for my demo. And I also used the drop-down, which is easy enough, but you can see it's highly configurable. And uses a very intuitive syntax. So that actually is a menu drop-down. There's also select drop-down. So if you look at the source of the examples, you get the idea that this is just a markup language that is easy to understand and then generates a lot of standard web component code that modern browsers support. So it's pretty spectacular, I would say. It's very easy to use, even for a, let's say, non-front-end guy like me. So here I am in the source code of the index.html page, the new one that uses Shoelace. So there's a skeleton HTML here, and you notice that in the header I've been importing the Shoelace.js and the Shoelace dark style sheet. So that's why the appearance is dark mode. And I also still use jQuery because, well, I just can, and it's a nice framework in itself, or a library. And of course I have my Siebel app.js and Siebel app CSS for, well, the custom JavaScript and custom style. So this is the main body. So there's a function that is called on loading, load app. And there's the first main container, which is hidden by default. And you can see I'm using Shoelace right here to define a spinner, which is not visible right now, and a dialog to enter the credentials. And I have another div here with a bunch of alerts that are displayed or not, so that these are kind of predefined Shoelace components that I can show and hide if I want to. And here's a row of buttons. So there's the login button, which is the only one visible, and then we have the accounts and contacts and leads button. You notice I'm using SL button here. So that will generate the whole button for me, but I still have to take care of the event handlers. And then there's a big div with the app content, which is populated dynamically when you click the buttons and search and so forth. So that's the skeleton HTML, and you see if we compare it to the old version, the big difference is that I'm no longer using standard HTML. I'm using shoelace markup to define the skeleton. And also if you look in the Siebel app JS file, so I'm doing a little bit of rounds. It's a few hundred lines of code, but it's can break it down very quickly. So the first variable that you see is a global variable called BCRM model. So that's the business model that is defined right in the same file. And you could argue this should be a different file or should be in a database, etc. But it's the easiest way of pointing it out here that we define the account business model. So we have the names of the Siebel business object, Siebel business components, references to the Siebel fields. As you would guess, this is used to concatenate the REST queries and update statements or upsert statements that run to the Siebel REST API. Some fields are editable. They might have an LOV type, which is a Siebel LOV type, which we use to fetch or pre-fetch the LOVs after login in an asynchronous call. So it fetches all the LOVs it can. There's also a map for the badges. So active is a green badge and inactive would be a red badge. So you see other fields there. You see a sort spec. There's the contact entity. So all mappings to the Siebel business object, business component. For example, entity called lead maps to opportunity in Siebel and also has a badge for the lead quality. Okay, so the first 150 plus lines is really that model. Then there's some helper functions, which I won't go into. There's the main upsert. So whenever it comes to talking to Siebel, you will notice there's a, Siebel v1.0 basic REST URL being generated and the REST calls being made either using the jQuery AJAX. So I can opt between asynchronous calls or a JavaScript fetch, depending on the implementation. So this is obviously the main function to send any put request for upserting data when the user updates anything. And there's the main show data function. So that actually generates the app container data. So first it runs a query. And then if it gets data back for each item in the data, and you can see I refactored this, so it was generating diffs and they were styled using CSS in the old version. So the new version is simply using shoelace, SL card in that case. So I'm generating a shoelace card with some contents with shoelace buttons, for example. They are not visible at the initially. And then I have, a classic jQuery event handler. So this is a little bit of mix of old and new style. And forgive me, I've been doing JavaScript for so long. I'm just mixing the styles. As long as it works, it's fine. So you would, of course, have your click event handler on the edit button, which will then create this editable version of the card and has several event handlers in itself, and then shows the save button, for example. So you see you can still use jQuery or you can use shoelace specific stuff. So for example, the save button, let me point this out. The save button checks the result status. So if it's not 200, there's some error. And in the old version, I simply displayed an alert, and the standard alerts from browsers are pretty annoying and ugly. So instead of doing an alert, I'm showing one of these shoelace alerts. So let's go back to the application and intentionally make a mistake. So for example, with this contact, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to remove the first name, which is a required field. I'm trying to save that. And see there's an alert popping up with the error. So this alert is a shoelace alert. It's already in the HTML. It's just shown for a few seconds and goes away. So try to save again, comes back, of course. So that is Shoelace in action, and it's quite handy. It generates a nice experience for the user. It's not an ugly alert that that interrupts your user experience. So that's one Shoelace use case here instead of using alerts. So that one part of the refactoring. You also see the SL batch I've been using. Let's go back here. It's one of the special use cases. Let's go to the leads, that's opportunities. You see there's a colorized batch showing details about the record in a more, well, accessible manner, so to speak. So you understand this is a high quality opportunity, and of course you can edit that. Let's set it to poor and save that. And let's go back, and now it's red. So there's a mapping from the LOV values to the Shoelace attributes, and Shoelace does the rest. So I just specify a batch with some details here. So the variant, especially, which is fetched from the map and looks like a pill. So I'm using all these Shoelace options that are documented here. And well, that's it. The batch container is literally, the batch itself is literally one line, one concatenation using the old jQuery world. Of course, I could just create a document element here, but jQuery is just so handy to do that. Okay, going down the code, there's more. There's the click handler on the record card itself that changes the appearance. And then we have the load app function, which also has been refactored a little bit for, to mostly handle the login dialog. So we see, for example, the login button is an event listener to show the dialog. And there's the search implementation, which is basically unchanged from previous version. So it allows the user to search. There's the query option, which actually tries to show the spinner, but it's not showing. So let me just copy that line and just run it in the console so you see what happens when this line is run. So there's a Shoelace spinner running, but it's too fast for the spinner to actually show up. So you can just show and hide that spinner that Shoelace generates for me. Okay, and you see how the query is concatenating the GET request to the Siebel inbound REST API. So I will put a link in the description for the REST API module of the Siebel 23 workshops in case you're new to the Siebel REST API. This is a demonstration web app that demonstrates a use case for the Siebel REST API to query and upsert records and also fetch list of values. It supports authentication, and you have a function here to, well, get the LOVs, and that function is called by, calls the BCRM call service, a wrapper function to call a business service using the REST API, of course. So any business service you call must be authorized by responsibility. But there is a fetch going on, and it's actually asynchronous, so that LOV fetching happens in the background while the user is just logged in. Of course, it only takes less than a second, so the LOVs are fetched using a standard EI LOV service here. And it fetches only the LOVs that you specify in the model. And we are at the bottom of the code. I know this was a very quick walkthrough. The code's available on GitHub for you to digest, for you to put it in a test environment. And again, be careful about it. It's strictly educational. You use it at your own peril. Hope you enjoyed this little demo, this little update for the Siebel app that is available as a REST inbound demo. Signing off here. Thanks for watching. Take care and bye-bye.